like a whiteboard in my own teaching. I've just gotten so used to it. And so I like doing it that way. So today we're going to focus in mostly on auditory input, strategies, like little tiny strategies that help us get language across to students in a way they can understand it and respond. And then strategies, then teaching instructional frameworks, like activities that can help us provide lots of auditory input in that same kind of comprehensible and communicative way. So more than practice or rehearsal, but really communicating with the students in class. So this is a document that I'll share, so you don't need to see any of the details right now, but just to get a sense for where I am going to be heading. Get me out of there. I'm going to be looking at these kinds of things, sort of in reference to last week, or not last week, earlier, the previous session. I was talking about starting from listening comprehension and building and working towards reading. And so that's reflected in here. So introducing some new words and using them in context a whole lot. So that's where we're going. And then the follow-up to that would be the next time that we meet for training, looking at massive reading input that's with the whole class, very supported activities, and then moving towards more independent reading for students. So want to start off with some debriefing from last time. Those of you who had the chance to do something based on what we discussed last week, we'll begin from there. It's challenge by choice, if you're familiar with that phrase. As far as I'm concerned, it's up to you how much you would like to share or ask about. I'm not like checking up, but I am curious. If something occurred to you, something changed about something you did with students, I'd love to hear about it. And if there's some problems like, I hit this thing and I don't know how to do that, we can hit those briefly. And we'll talk again, somewhat briefly about comprehensibility of oral language. So what can we do? What things to avoid if we want students to understand lots of target language that they hear? And then how can we tell if they are understanding? So a bunch of little things we'll discuss there. And then actually more like an hour and a half of the time, I'm hoping to spend on 3 key teaching strategies that I've found helpful. I think they align with your goals with wanting to have more of an art and culture and literacy focus. I think these nicely lead into all of those things. And so we'll do little bits of demo and debrief, kind of discuss as we go. So it won't be the kind of demo in the first time where it's a longer extended lesson, but little short mini things. We'll discuss like, okay, how would you think about doing something similar with this next step? And then we'll try it together. And this part will be flexible, so we'll adjust the time frame based on what you all give as feedback. So if you want to spend a little more time on one thing, a little less on another, we can shift as we get there and as we experience it, see what you need. And then final points are planning next steps before the next time that we meet. So I hate that I have to do this little adjust my size again, but sometimes it will let me click the button that says go to the next slide, and sometimes it will not. So that's why I keep. Let's start out with debriefing from the first time. Any questions, thoughts, points that came up? As a reminder, thinking about communication and comprehension as 2 main principles in our language classrooms. I talked a little about sequencing lessons, just kind of the big picture, building oral language comprehension, moving towards reading in characters later. We also mentioned a bit about vocabulary rather than seeing it as like standalone, like a train car that kind of hooks in a little bit together in like a big long line, thinking of how we build vocabulary knowledge for our students as like an expanding cloud. So when we begin with words they're going to keep on needing throughout other contexts, we can just keep on adding more vocabulary at their pace. And then we also did the Chinese language teaching demo and debrief. So any questions, thoughts, points?
Okay, so yesterday we played rock, paper, scissors.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So then we were talking about games, and so we were asking, so what games do you like to play? All that stuff. And So there was a couple, like somebody said lacrosse, and I was like, oh gosh, I don't know how to say that in Chinese. So I just kept saying lacrosse. And, so I don't know if it was better to just keep saying it in English or if I should have like looked it up real quick. I don't know. I was like, just I don't know that one.
Yeah, it was a thing that your students know and mattered to your students, but it's not something I learned in a Chinese context either. I did at one point look it up because at my middle school and the high school where I taught, they both had lacrosse teams. And so you can use a Chinese word, but when I've talked to Chinese people about it, they don't always recognize the word. So it is really unusual. It's like one of those cases where this isn't from the language community, but we need it to talk about ourselves in the language. So if it's something that's really important to your students, I think it'd be fine to stop, say, oh, that's something that, and I've even explained it, like sometimes I just didn't happen to encounter that word. Maybe I forgot something. I'm a non-native speaker. I might need to check. It's okay. Like you're modeling lifelong learning in doing that too. Okay. So I think either way could be okay. If you feel like lacrosse is just going to come up that one day for 10 minutes, maybe just using that one English noun isn't going to be a problem. They're getting lots of language and context if they're hearing it being used to, it's kind of like a proper name in that way, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I started, so returning to Christina Clark's question, it happened to me many times. And if I don't know on the spot, if I have time, I'll look it up or I'll make sure.
Oh, Ying, you got muted somewhere. There you go.
I'll make sure that next time when I'm with the student, I'll get that information to that student because that's something that they're curious and most likely they will use it, even though we won't use it. For example, there was this Canadian student and he wants to know my favorite food is, and I can't think of it right now. So I asked, what is that food? And he told me it's basically French fries with cheese and gravy.
Yeah, poutine, sure.
I don't know that word, but the next section I made a book about it. I said, basically, I don't think the Chinese would know that, but how about just saying, I love French fries with cheese and gravies on it, and Chinese would understand that. Another occasion is, we say, oh, do you like orange juice? And they're like, I like orange juice, but only if there's pulp in it. And I'm like, for some reason, I just couldn't remember, like, how do I say that pulp? So immediately I'm like, let's search it up together. Oh, okay. 果肉, the fruit.
Oh, fun. That's very logical.
That's how we say it. 果肉. Hey, I don't know everything. So I'm telling the student that, I don't know everything, but I don't use it as often where we're using the Chinese language. But that's probably something you wanted to say because you're like, only if there's juice with pulp in it. So I think either way, again, but again, it's something that the student bring up. That means that's what they really like to do. I'll probably find out either not on the spot or next week. I said, I'll find out next week for you. Regarding Diana's, the workshop that you're going through, I went through it with my student, and I think it's really helpful. The only thing is I write it on the whiteboard, and I wonder how I continue to do that for the next class. Should it be better if I put it on a slide so that I could add a little bit? So again, the snowball effect. So I could add a little bit, add a few words next time, because of just that 15-minute comprehension input, you're writing about maybe 20 vocabulary there. And the next time, are you still going to write it on the whiteboard? That is my concern about time consuming, and how do I add that?
Sure, great question.
Next day lesson or the third day lesson.
Yeah, and one of the things I think it might come up today a little bit, because I won't presume that everyone here remembers words that were introduced in Chinese last time. If you're not already fluent in Chinese, you may not recall. But one of the things that's nice, I think, about continuing to give that kind of scaffolding is that when students are absent, you immediately catch them up. But because you're using language and context to communicate about something, the students who were there when it was introduced, It's not like you're focused in on, now remember what this word means. You're thinking about the meaning of the word to do something else. And so it's okay. I think it's totally fine for those students who were exposed to it before to see it again. If a slide helps to have that just neatly organized, that could be good. What I try to sense with my own students is their comprehension level in real time. So if it's a word where I feel like I'm thinking of one from last time when we did training, it's yo. And I'm going to see if those who were here remember that when I need it shortly and later today. And if they don't, I'm going to go back and write it again. But if I see comprehension, maybe they answer questions well, other checks of their comprehension work out, I probably won't write it on the whiteboard anymore. I won't be as concerned. So it's kind of like this, I don't want to overwhelm by having lots of things. I do generally use the whiteboard that way, but a slide would be totally great, especially if you're moving in and out of classrooms. You need to have things ready to go right away. You don't want to take the time. That makes a lot of sense. Did that?
I also like the fact that we were doing TPR to let the students show us when they had a question, because sometimes our teacher, we had in mind that we need to continue to teach, and when I introduce them, like, I don't know, time out or I had a question, I find that the student do it right away.
Cool.
I'm surprised that they are interacting with me that way, because otherwise I would just keep on talking. But once I tell them that they could do that, they're doing it. And this is for the Zoom class that I have.
Oh, great. Yeah. And Zoom, I think it's all the more on the student to let you know, because there's fewer cues. Your smaller window, even if you're on camera. If you're off camera, there's less different kinds of modalities you can use to communicate. So making sure students have some kind of way, that's super. Wow, encouraging. Yeah. And you're going to have a nice point for like a slide down, maybe 2 or 3 slides down. So that's great. Anything else? I don't want to take too much time, but we have another couple of minutes if you have anything. Oh, actually, let me move on to open up the next one, because we had a couple of kind of, I didn't put it on a separate slide. I was thinking of kind of the specific like tasks, the homework ideas for thinking about shifting from practicing language or focused on language itself to thinking about how can we use this language to communicate in some way about something, about ourselves, about pictures we see, stories from the culture, a whole host of possibilities. And then the other one was like observing student comprehension during the class. Any reflections on those 2 points? Okay, I think I gave you enough wait time, but pause me. And actually those kinds of symbols, if you want to use them here, that's totally fine with me too. Or just unmute, because we're a smaller group too. So yeah, but I do see your little windows up at the top, so I can see you.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes. Oh, Christina. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't have a real specific example, but I did want to say it was very helpful to be thinking about, one, how can I sort of staying in this language, communicating with the language from the get-go and simplifying it more, which is something I think I needed to do a little bit. But simplifying it without losing that ability to actually have a conversation. So that's sort of what I was trying to focus on. And it was really helpful. And I think, wasn't perfect, but it was really fun to see how it engaged the students.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. And I agree. It's like a process continually. It's a process because it changes with different learners and different settings, and maybe, what day of the week it was or what time of day it was, things shift around. And so it is really, I think it's more of an art being a teacher. Cool.
I had one comment and a question. I really, in watching the video from last time, I really appreciated how slow you went, because I have a tendency to like get excited and talk too much. And so that was it's something I know I needed to do, but it was really like, as a learner, experiencing it as a learner, like I felt like oh yeah, this is why, like, cause it was so
Mhm.
reassuring to have you point to things and go really slow. And that like was a big thing. It's a big thing I'm working on. And then I had a question about like I've introduced this in my classes in the past,
Mhm.
and I've had some kids who literally don't stop doing it.
Oh,
And part of it could
yeah.
be that I'm talking too fast, right? Like, I'm sure. Um, and part of it is like, I just told you in English, like, or I told you 3 times in English. How,
Yeah. You're
like,
trying to
and
wean them
I
off
never,
of the
yeah, and I
English or
never
the
shame
thing
them.
they
I
think
never,
they understand. Yeah. I've heard this
yeah,
especially with some younger kids. Um, and and I think it's interesting. Like, I don't think they're aware that they understand or don't understand sometimes. And so maybe even coaching them, like, here are ways that I can tell you understood. When I said that thing, you did the action that it meant. When I pointed to this, you saw a picture of it. When, something like, I wonder sometimes if that helps, like it's an anxiety factor for the student, maybe. And then maybe the mental block of, oh, that's another language. I can't do that. And I wonder sometimes if that's part of the issue, and that those are kind of trickle in things. But yeah, I mean, making sure that you're responding to pacing, you're giving support to help with comprehension, but also maybe informing students like, here's how you help me. Like, yeah, it's not, your reaction to hearing another language should not be this constantly. Yeah. So yeah, I wonder if is it like individual kids in the class, or is it more across a whole classroom?
yeah. It was when I was teaching middle school, they were like, there were a few kids that were just, and they were like generally, if I'm stereotyping like a little bit, they were like the very needy kids, like who just like,
Yeah.
and so I had
Overwhelmed.
like, what I ended up doing is, I tried, obviously not to shame them at all, like, and encourage them to keep telling me when they were confused. And again, after I had told them maybe 3 times in English what something meant, and then I would like pull them after class and say like, "Hey, what's going on?" Like,
Mhm.
and I think you're totally right. Like a lot of times they have this mental block because like someone in their house told them like, "Well, I'm never going to learn a foreign language. Like, what do we need that?"
That could be
Or
it too.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, or I'm not smart enough and you won't be either, or like there were like those inner dialogues going on that they had gotten from their parents. So
Yeah.
it was really, you're right. It was more about that. So
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you handled it really well. Yeah, it's a challenge. I think there's all these little dynamics, and they come out like in surprising ways sometimes. So, yeah. Shall we keep going? Okay. Okay. So, looking at comprehensibility of oral language, things we can do and things to avoid. Let's brainstorm some. I have a list on the next slide. Let's see how many you can get more than I did. I don't know. I just kind of brainstormed it myself. There's so many possibilities here, I think. And I'm thinking things we can do, but also things to avoid. Kristen was just kind of saying one in that, maybe she tends to rush. She's getting excited, maybe even because the kids are responsive. And then I do that when I'm teaching for sure. So knowing my habit is when I get interested and excited, I tend to move faster. I better watch and make sure. Now, are the students ready for that, or is it just me? So there's a thing to avoid. What else? Oh, and if you'd like to use the chat, feel welcome to do that as well. I thought also about sharing screens so you can like type on the screen with the annotation tools, but we're a small group, so we'll keep it like this.
I noticed, you repeated a lot, probably more than I had been repeating, and I needed it when I was the student. So repetition would be one I could think that we could do to make sure that.
Right. It's it's not as boring when it's newer to you, you know? It can feel like redundant or boring, I think, to the teacher. If it feels a bit like that, that's probably good if you're working with beginners. Something else?
So just remembering to check from like, you know, keep going from last week, make sure that they remember, like, you know, yo, mayo, and like, that's, remember this, yeah, I've got it, or
Yeah.
we kind of don't remember.
Yeah, not presume.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And I think you're checking for their understanding, which is good. You're not presuming that something introduced stuck yet. And I think we tend to hope for that, but we don't want to shame students. It's just a thing. It's just they either in that moment they remember it or they didn't. And I've sometimes had students like pause me 10 minutes into class, like, wait, I lost, what was that word? And it's like, it was the word that we introduced that day. So we'd like used it 40 times. And so sometimes they've even like kind of laughed like, oh man, that was the one. And like, but it's fine. It's your brain did something, you were processing, you were working on other things. And that one just, you got lost and it confused you and you stopped us and we cleared it up. And that's what we wanted to do. And now we can keep going.
I think for the review, now I start to do not just reviewing the word of what's happening last week, but change the vocab a little bit, maybe even plug in the English or to see if they understand what the context mean, like I have it, don't have what, and change the meaning. So to have a check understanding of, you know, maybe last week was about mouse and cat, and this week might be about tiger and rabbit or something that they haven't introduced, but I'll use that in another context. Or I have mommy, do I have daddy? To review what's happening last week so that it's something new, and they're progressing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's kind of a form of repetition in a way. It's like you're using comprehensible language and then expanding just a little bit to something new. So you're, by reusing that familiar language, you're building comprehension of the new stuff. You're building the kind of the language system where the brain's starting to go, huh, I keep hearing sentences that follow this pattern. I bet it should be like this again. Or, you know, like, not that they're conscious of it, but yeah, I think there's a lot of good things about doing things that way. Other things we can do to help language that students hear, especially, be understood.
Okay, sometimes I think sometimes we need to use visuals. So pictures, they have a lot, so we can use them. And sometimes I just use some games. For example, we study animals, the names of animals. So when we do the review, I just let them listen to the sound these animals make. And then it's like a competition between the students and they try to remember the name of that animal. So it's kind of fun for them.
Yeah. And the first thing that you said, I wanted to build on
visual
that.
aids.
Yes, visual aids. Thank you. I think all the more the younger the student is, the less abstract their mental development is, literally. Like, it's like, isn't it age 12, I've heard, is around the time where students start to get better with abstract thinking for most kids. And so if you're asking them to think, you know, abstractly, making a picture in their mind instead of seeing a picture and talking about it, you're asking them to do higher processing. So yeah, more visuals is great. And it doesn't hurt older people to have more visuals either. It's good. So yeah, objects as well as pictures, actions that you do, things on your facial expression that reflect the meaning, and
body gestures.
Sounds, like you were saying, the sounds of the animals. And
some, as you said, some realia.
Realia, yeah.
Yeah, they have a lot.
Anything else?
And probably just TPR. A lot of the motion or physical motion that represents something can stick to the kid's mind. For example, the yo, that means you're having something versus, oh, now you have nothing. Or you guys, and then I start doing you guys, and they pick it up. So they're picking it up with that sound, or love, or like,
Yeah, I agree. And it's another one of those little fun things that students say after you do that for a while. We were getting ready for a semester exam at a high school, and the students were like looking at stuff to review, and I think I was asking them questions, or I was saying something, and they're like, and I would do a gesture without saying the word, and they're like, oh, whew. And I'm like, can we have you just stand in the front of the room, just do the gestures? You don't have to say the language anymore. We just need something that, it made them feel more confident, but it assured them that they were understanding. Yeah, and it's great for kids that need to move too. They have something that's building the class positively that gives them the opportunity to move.
Yeah, especially.
Oh, go ahead.
Especially for younger kids, I think. Yesterday I was substituting the first graders, and there was a 15-minute break time, and I'm like, I'm going to teach you another language, and so we start to say how to say I love you, how are you, and hello, and they were able to, in that 15-minute, learn it so quickly because of the gesture that I'm using for each word. They can just combine that, like I, you, and then love, and then okay, I know how to like do that word puzzle. So definitely for younger students too.
Yeah. Cool.
I was gonna say things to avoid. Obviously, I said it earlier, like not shaming, like making kids feel bad that they don't understand. Yeah, I'm sure I have inadvertently. So
yeah, I think maybe the other thing there is if they misunderstand, kind of, it's not quite shaming, but focusing a lot on student errors instead of what they're trying to communicate. So like, let's say child starts to say something and they didn't quite get it, but you knew kind of what they meant. I'll check that I understood. And so here's like an example, like a classic issue with the X sound in Chinese. So it's 喜欢 means to like or to love something. A lot of times students will maybe have some trouble with that word at first when they're trying to use it. And instead of like working on the pronunciation issue, I respond to the meaning. So they said she won or something. I know what they're saying. I know they're in process of developing good pronunciation. It's not there yet, but I just would respond to the meaning of that instead of focus in on that part, because I could understand. So it's kind of like my comprehension of them, I guess, too. Let's go to see what my slide had on there. Let's see. Oh, and this was the one, I added this to the slide this morning. And Ying gave us great examples of this. So coach students to help you. I think that might be I put it first because I thought, like, why did I not think of this? It's not all on us as a teacher. One of the things we can do is give our students tools to help us. And so coaching them in whatever way seems to fit better is going to be great for them. It really models, I think, that the class is about communicating as people together. It's not about me as a teacher unloading language to you and you should just receive. No, it's a collaborative thing that we're creating together. So coaching them however they do that. So like I was doing this, we do timeout to have explanation stuff. I'm in an ASL class, the American Sign Language. This is the word slow. So like you stroke your hand kind of slowly to show that you want the teacher to slow down. That could be handy. So not overwhelming them with too many things that you're asking them to do, but making sure that they know that you're going to be really responsive to anything that you're getting back from them in terms of their comprehension. So slowing down, literally the pace of the words. Here's here's though maybe something that I've seen someone do who was new to trying to use language with students in the classroom. And what they did, I'll model it in English. Okay. Hi, how are you? Was that easier to understand? Like, if you know what I mean? Like, they really did this sing-song thing and all the words were stretched and run together. And I could see my students like trying to understand this person. And I restated what she said at one point, because one of my students just looked at me like, what the heck was that? And I said the same thing that she had said, but what I did to slow down was like this. Hi, how are you? Like, do you feel like there's pauses in between? It's not that the word had to stretch. So if you're ever tempted to like, how do I slow down? Think about taking a breath in between words maybe, or counting 1, 2, 3, and then moving on, like silently in your head. So 我 有 猫 like so like that. I mean, if you were brand new first day, maybe right there is your pace. And let's see, Christina Crane, I think, was the one that was talking about this, is simplify but keep language intact. So you're still communicating, but you're not running into lots and lots of new words or losing their comprehension because of that. So simplifying, but still keeping language there. Repeat with differences. So this was, Ying brought this up too. So using words that are familiar again, but putting them in a new context, just a little bit of difference. So now they're having to think of it again. So then this way, it's not just memorizing a sentence or memorizing a question and answer, because that's limited in its benefit for the student. Really what we want is language exposure so that they are mentally developing their own language system over time in their head. If we do it so that they memorize like, how are you? I'm fine. How are you? I'm fine. And they never hear anything else than that, they won't be able to use the language more broadly or spontaneously. At least they're not as likely to. So repeating with differences helps to build that more complex language structure up in their mind. Using familiar words, we talked about this actually, lacrosse. So using names, synonyms, cognates. If you have a language with cognates, that's really nice for you. I hope you enjoy it because Chinese doesn't really have it. So we use a lot of names. Synonyms is something like you have students with a little bit of language going. Now you can use the language they do know to describe a new word or to refer back to another word. Drawing, using pictures, using objects. Judicious use of known language. So I'm going to use the term L1 for that, known language. So their first language, their mother tongue, but it could be a variety of them. So it's easier to say L1 than to say English because it may not be the case where you're teaching. So looking for how the teacher can use that, how the students can use that to show their comprehension. So this phrase is actually used a lot in different research, but this is one of the articles. It was in Foreign Language Annals, which is ACTFL's own research journal. Sometimes I hear people say, well, ACTFL says we should never use the first language. Actually, it doesn't. It doesn't say that. What it's wanting us to do is they say like 90% or more of class time, as much as possible, we want to use the target language. But there are ways that using some known language aids our students' intake of the new language. And this article is about that. And it was actually in a setting, Arabic learners were talking with tutors. So they were talking with a native speaker. And the native speaker could see that they got really lost because of some little phrase in the midst of their talk. They were more advanced learners. And they would just refer to that word in English because the Arabic speakers were more fluent in English than the learner was in Arabic. And it was fast, it was quick, and it got them right back into the communication. Where if they continued to try to use just the second language, the person, they were delaying communication. It felt like this artificial rule put on them that actually stifled what they were there to do, which was communicate, really. And Martina Bex has a great post. So these are links I have this PowerPoint to share. So she has a little beautiful chart that you could even print and put up on the wall to remind you of like, what are things that I can do during class to help my students understand more language orally. Get off of my button again. There we go. Okay, how can we tell if students understand? What do we look for? Or ask them to show or do?
When they're responding by gesture or verbally.
Yeah, they say something that makes sense. They do an action that shows they probably understood. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. I see Christina Clark leaned in. I think you're muted though.
Okay.
There you go.
So sometimes they say it back, but in English. So I know that they know what I'm saying, but they just say it in English, not in Chinese, which, you know, I don't say like, say it in Chinese. I just let them say it in English.
Yeah, yeah. And this is one of those issues too, where I've heard sometimes students will keep on saying it in English, maybe when you think like, I think they know the Chinese now. So like trying to navigate that issue of being affirming of the student's response, especially when it's like you're asking for responses from students. And if they're using English, it's still showing that they understood and they're following and they're engaged. But if it's constant that then they never use Chinese, sometimes that can be one of those same kinds of issues of that mental block of like, you know, I'm an English speaker. I can't do that other language. I'm going to feel weird. And like helping them feel like this language belongs to me too. And getting that sense that it's okay for them to explore those sounds.
I
So
did
it's kind of
actually have, when I very first started teaching, I had some Chinese kids who spoke Chinese at home, but they would not speak Chinese at school. So it was hard for me to get them to speak Chinese, even though we were in Chinese class.
Yeah.
Like they just, yeah, it was like this mental thing. Like we speak English at school.
Yeah. 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 I started putting, and maybe you remember from the language demo that I started putting that slide in there where it was second language speakers of Mandarin, one of whom is from Hong Kong. So she looks Chinese. People think, well, you know, but she's a Cantonese first language speaker. So like seeing other people who are second language speakers of Chinese, and then like that's you too. Like you're part of this club now. You speak Chinese too. Yes, you do. You know. Now, with the case of a heritage student like that, then there's extra layers where, you know, maybe mom and dad are the people that they are okay talking with. Sometimes even there, they might not. I had friends like that, heritage speakers of different languages who would talk in English to their parents. And so those, yeah, the extra layers of issues. Maybe over time in seeing the comfort level in the class and the culture that develops in the classroom, that you're accepted where you are, and speaking Chinese here is cool and good. Maybe over time that opens a way for them to be more open to it. Other things? I have one. So hopefully I'm not cutting somebody off. One of the ways that I think in a classroom, especially seeing if students understand, is like looking for their affect, looking on their faces. What are they doing? It doesn't necessarily mean they have to have eye contact. Some kids culturally, or because of things like autism or other things, like I don't want to be demanding eye contact per se. I may be looking for where are their eyes gazing, so that if I'm pointing at a picture, I can see that they're taking in what I'm hoping they're understanding. But it doesn't have to be like this constant eye contact thing. But if I'm seeing students that I don't have another reason to suspect this is their normal way of processing, I want to see something that's looking like this, or they're responding emotionally appropriately within the language that we're using. So like some of those reading the faces, Susan Gross from TPRS talked about it as teaching to the eyes. Again, it doesn't mean that you need to have eye contact per se, but it means looking for, are they doing this? Are they doing like a checked out, like I'm not even listening to you, you know, with the understanding that not every child is going to express that in the same way. So it's a little fuzzier, but it's, I think, also helpful.
I do have a student that she likes to do things while, like, she'll color or draw or something while she's listening, but I still can tell because she'll say things, like even if she's looking away, she'll say things and I know that she's like comprehending and everything. So and yeah, for me, like
Yeah.
I'm like, look at me, but
Yeah.
of course I don't do that, but you know, but
it feels like
yeah,
you're not paying attention the way I
Yeah.
expected you to look. Yeah.
right.
But great that you found that there are these other ways that you're getting that information back.
Mhm.
And yeah, and I think even like there are teachers talking about kids with selective mutism. They don't speak. They don't. And so, you know, are there ways that they can write? Are there things that they can do that they are comfortable with to give you that kind of feedback too? So working out those one-on-one cases is really good.
I find it hard to track the students' comprehension when I am on Zoom because I'm in the bigger projector and they're in the smaller boxes, and it's very easy to neglect them. And especially with a lot of the people learning Chinese, they're like you said, they might be having they're conservative and they're shy. They don't like to speak. Whereas if I see them in person, I think I could have a better feel. I have this instance where I think that they didn't comprehend, and then later on they send me the parents sent me an email saying that, oh, this was way too beginner for my kids understand all of them. And then later on, then I have to think of a way to because they're actually just looking at me, they're engaged, but they don't want to respond because they're like, I knew it, I already know it, I didn't need to respond. So that kind of that was something new that I had to learn that I didn't pick up. I thought it was the opposite, that they didn't speak, meaning maybe they don't understand.
Yeah. It's hard to read.
So a way is in the chat line. So when I see that the student constantly are being muted himself, then I asked it, can you just put on the chat line, even a yes or no, or that'll be good that I know that, you know, let's move on to the next subject.
That is great. Yeah. If you are using Zoom too, you might see down at the bottom of your video window, there are little reactions, which they aren't letting me show apparently because I'm sharing screen. It's probably up on my camera view, the little one instead. So yeah, some of those. And I think one of the things about using that online stuff is now you have to be extra aware, like, oh yeah, we have this tool, but it's not natural to use it all the time. And so if coaching everybody, reminding them, yeah. And I think, again, keep thinking of that, coaching the students about what is it that you need so that you pace appropriately, so that they know, like I'm seeing a lot of this. Does that mean you don't know yet? Do we need to do more with this? Or yeah, it's.
I think we
this is
also,
why it's an art.
as coach, we need to maybe stop and check because we're on the Zoom coaching. Then when I review my video that I have recorded, I notice students are doing this a lot already, and I just totally missed it because I am thinking that it's okay when the screen can only fit so many little faces.
Yes.
I missed that part that they actually had a question. So maybe stopping myself a little bit and say, do you want to say something now? Constantly, that maybe little 1 minute of my own checkup would help the student stop being confused.
Yeah, that's great. Kind of like a double check so that students who you missed, or maybe they weren't comfortable, like kind of breaking in, but now that you've given a specific pause, maybe they will. Cool.
I've been using a lot of something that Kristen had talked to us about, which sort of inserting frequent short assessments. I do it a lot with slides because I'm online, with things like yes or no questions. And or she does true and false sometimes too. And those have been really helpful. And one thing that I liked was making it easy for them to be successful. So checking their comprehension, obviously the stuff I want to be making sure they're getting, but helping them feel like, oh, I do know that. And building up. And my kids have really responded well to that. I think they like, oh, I can get these answers. I can, and it's a lot of group stuff. So thumbs up, thumbs down. So they're not necessarily on the spot. But I found that really helpful. And I throw in silly things, that like, obviously it's not that. And they love that because they think that's funny. So
yeah, super.
Helped.
Very cool. Maybe one more before we move on. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and break in right now if you had something you thought of. So here's my suggestions for like what could students do, and I bet you we've hit almost all of them. Let's see if we get anything. Oh, acting as acting out, like so you would be maybe telling the story, and everybody in the classroom would act out what they did in that story. So that's a little bit more than just doing a gesture or TPR, but that would be like up on your feet or maybe not on your feet, but acting out the whole thing that's narrated. Drawing, we didn't talk about drawing too. Little kids take a long time to draw. This has been something I learned when I started teaching 4th grade. So being aware of that issue, but using it wisely and occasionally at least, it can be great. Having them say in English. Retelling, we didn't talk about quite so much. This could be like one of those little mini assessment things that Christina mentioned, where give me a sentence about what we've been talking about, either in the new language or in their first language. I sometimes would pause at the end of 20 minutes of class time or something, have kids work with partners or a small group and think of all the things that they could say in Chinese from what we had been talking about already in class. And then they have 1 minute and they try to say as a group, and then it goes to the next group, they try to add even more things, unique statements or questions based on what we had discussed. So it's kind of an assessment for me. I can see like, it sounds like one of the words I've been trying to introduce here, none of them are saying it. So I know they're probably not ready for that one. I might need to continue to scaffold and provide comprehension supports with that. And so I did ask for it usually actually in second language, but if you feel like it's more appropriate to have them say, summarize in 3 sentences what we've talked about, use English to do it. It's a great way to check what their comprehension is too. So yeah, I think we got a lot of that. So I was going to shift into teaching strategies. These 3 are very adjustable. So what I'm hoping to do is kind of introduce a basic version, try it out a little bit, talk about how you would use it and plan it if it's new for you, and then talk about ways that we can modify it or change it up a little bit so that if you did this week, it wouldn't feel like exactly the same activity if you did it the next week. So some little twist. Likewise, listen and draw, and then experiential learning. I've put these in order of what I think is harder, like easier, mid skill level, challenging, in my personal experience. I also was trying to pay attention to things that I thought aligned with your goals, with art and culture things, particularly with picture talk and experiential learning. But they also do build in together really nicely. You could use these as a sequence if you wanted to with your students, building oral language here, deepening it here, and then using it in an experience of some kind. So I'll explain more about what I'm talking about there. And then in a few minutes, I was going to offer you a couple minutes of break because we've almost met for an hour already. So let's talk through this a little bit. We'll start that, and then in a few minutes, we'll take a little pause midway through picture talk stop for coffee or whatever, stretch. Picture talk also gets called look and discuss. If you type it in a Google search, I bet you're going to find things under either term. So you have a series of photos or images that relate to a topic, in this case, rather than a whole storyline necessarily. So I would find ones that are kind of interesting. Things that introduce cultural scenes, things that also come from the students' familiar cultural settings, but using the same language to describe both of those things. So showing fast food restaurants and eating in China and in the US, if we're talking about something about eating and food and going to restaurants. Let's see, images then too, like you could be looking at something that's not a photograph, a sketch, a drawing, a piece of art. And then by a series, I'm thinking like, I usually try to find like between 10 and 20 that I can kind of imagine using roughly the same language with the students on each slide with little differences. And we're going to look at some examples that I think accomplish that. They've got similar things in the picture, but a little different. So 10 to 20, not that I'm going to use them all or that I have to use them all, but then I have this nice padding, like I know I have plenty and I can then interact with them by asking scaffolded questions and describing what's on the picture and react to them in real time. One picture seems really engaging to them. Another one seems kind of boring. We can speed through that one and focus our time more on the ones that they've reacted to more positively or with more interest or curiosity. Yeah, see, think, wonder questions. Are you familiar with this kind of approach? Seeing some nodding, not necessarily. It's kind of an educational trendy thing. It's like turn to a partner and share what you see, what you think, and what you wonder about something that had been introduced. But if we use those to think about the kinds of questions we might ask our students about a picture, what do you see in the picture? So thinking about like actual objects there, can they identify those? Do they know what's going on in the picture? What's happening? Thinking about it, like what's their reaction to it? What's their opinion of it? What's their emotional reaction to it too? Does it, ooh, it looks scary, you know, that kind of thing. And then wondering questions, like things like, what would you do if this was you? What could happen next? What came before this? Depending on your language, that can be really complex language or that can be very, very simple. But as we get into examples, I think we'll see how to keep that pretty tight, pretty close to what the students understand. What I love about this is that when you're stuck, you go to the next picture. So it's a lot of nice scaffolding for the teacher. And then you have this freedom to react in real time to your students. That's why the 10 to 20 pictures. And then use imagination to go deeper. So instead of, because that mindset of communicating versus practicing and just reviewing vocabulary, the difference would be instead of looking at a picture and talking about the words that we can identify out of it alone, which is fine to, especially to start from, we can imagine like, what does the lion think about? What does the lion want? What does, you know, imagining there's a lion in the picture. If you were the lion, what would you do? So some of those like think and wonder questions allow us to go deeper in our imagination. One of the things that's really powerful about that drawing on their imagination is that every student now can be an expert. There's no wrong answer when you're imagining something. And so it invites every student in a kind of an equalizing way to be able to share something. They may not all know what they see. They may not be able to evaluate the situation that's in the picture because they don't have experience with it. But they can imagine something, and that you can affirm each child's imagination that way, I think. there are advantages to this. I was talking about some of them. They're really scaffolded. If you're new to trying to communicate in real time through the target language, I think this is a really nice place to begin. It was where I started too. I started using pictures because I was using a textbook. I used pictures from the textbook, and instead of just using them like a flashcard, like, what's this? It's a chair. Yep. This is a table. Okay. It was like, oh, look, it's a chair. Is it a big chair? Is it a small chair? Do you have a chair like this chair? Like, so now we're making it a topic of discussion. So nice advantages. It's a nice way to move from language practice into context and communication about language, I think. Challenge though, I don't know. Any of this is challenging, right? Being a teacher is challenging. I don't know if there are specific challenges to picture talk as compared to other things. This is really my favorite. Some of you, I'm sure, are using this kind of strategy. What do you think of it? Advantages, challenges, or other tips?
I think for me, whenever I've done it, I like how you said, when you're stuck, go to the next picture. Cause like I'll go online and I'll say, oh, I'll see another teacher posted this series of picture talk slides, and they'll be like, this will be great for a picture talk, and then I get to it and I'm like, I don't know what to say. Like, I am stuck. Right. And so I tend to, in my head, go, oh my gosh, I really need to know what to say for each one of these. And if I get stuck, I tend to really get stuck. So going to the next one is really the advantage of this, and just not worrying about it. Like, you're just having fun. You're just talking about things. And I think
that's the agenda. The agenda is being able to use the language with the students in a way that they're interested in, not, I have to say this many sentences about this picture. I need to,
And I
it's
think
just
one of the other things I've done with it too is I've had kids send me their most interesting family picture, from a trip or from a
very
an
cool
experience they had. I love doing those because then the kid gets to shine for a moment. I'm with you. I don't find as many challenges with this. Other than I feel like for me, if I do it too often, it feels boring. But the kids may not feel that way, maybe it's just me. So
yeah, I agree. I think maybe the challenge is especially in, like you said, about I don't know what to say about that. So what I try to do is maybe there's some words that I know I want to be able to use a lot in that class. So I'll think of some way to search for an image like that. Somebody wants something. Let's say I wants to eat is what I'll search for, something, because that's going to have some compelling looking pictures of people drooling over food or something like that. But so once I've got those pictures though, then I want to think through a little bit of what things can I say in language the students already have, and how can I add just that little bit more onto that chunk of language that they've got pretty well, and making sure they still understand that old vocabulary that we're using too. So keeping that kind of in mind. You can totally script it. If it's a challenge to think I don't know what I'm going to ask, you can absolutely write down questions and discussions or description statements. Another trick is if you ask a question and the students respond, saying it back in a sentence. So well, let's go to an example picture because maybe that'll help. So here we have our water buffalo. I'm going to do this really in Chinese. We'll see how it goes. So non-Chinese speakers need to help me do this. I'm going to go like this. Yo, niu, niu, yo, niu. Yo.
Have.
Yeah. Have. 有有牛. What do you think 牛 means?
I have
Water
2
buffalo?
guesses.
I got water buffalo. I saw somebody say 2. This is a good illustration of why pointing to a picture doesn't always communicate the exact meaning. And I might even say, in Chinese, there's often a word for an animal that it's a big broad word. We can use it for many words in English. 有牛有牛有2只牛有2只牛 2只牛有3有3只牛吗？没有。Do you remember 没有? What would I mean 没有 this time? Yeah, I see Malud doing this like, yeah. Yeah. Doesn't have or there aren't. There aren't? 也可以。有2只牛。没有3只牛。你们有牛吗？ Oh, Kristen 没有牛。Kristen 没有牛。对，我没有牛。我没有牛。Julia 你有牛吗？Julia 没有牛。哪里 over there 有牛？对不对？Christina Clark 说对 yeah. Can you give me a thumbs up if you think yes or no? 有哪里有牛？对不对？对，有牛，有2只牛。Now I'm imagining by this point, it's like, okay, how much more can I say? That's a pretty simple picture. Ding! Go on to the next. So, 有牛吗？有它 It sounds the same. It's written differently. 他有牛。他有牛，牛，对哈，他有两只牛吗？没有，没有。哦 Kristen， 可能 we don't see it now, but yeah, you can, yeah. 想象 yeah, 想象那里 there 他有两只牛吗？没有，没有。那里没有两只牛。Okay, I'm gonna stop and do teacher talk stuff, and then well, actually, should we pause here now? Do you want to stand up, get something to drink, or should we debrief this a little bit and then go back? Let's debrief a bit. I'm not seeing anybody anxious to get up yet, so okay. So I was trying to do like day one, total beginner, right? It's more challenging when you have that. I think in exploratory stuff where you're week to week, only once a week, you kind of have to treat each day a little bit like that very first day of class. But I'm mildly interesting, yeah. I mean, new context, right? Hopefully. I have another couple of pictures, and this is where I would go with them next. So those with the Chinese cultural familiarity, you're recognizing a story now, probably. And that's where I would be heading with students, if maybe not very, very soon yet, because if that was day one, but maybe like 10th, 12th day, maybe they're ready to start hearing the whole story about this. But now we can use that word "niu" again, and they have, there is an ox. There is also something else. Think for a moment. What are 3 statements that you could make about this picture using pretty much the same words that we've just had? Oh, I can put it over here. I'll do this sneaky thing. I'm going to put this word down in a different place so it's showing up on screen. It all sounds the same. All the pronouns sound the same in Chinese. If you'd like, chat, or if you want to unmute.
There is the cow, there is the mouse, because we did do mouse last time. There is water. I mean, water's different, but it's still there.
Yep. Those all sound good. What else? What other statements could you make?
I noticed you do a lot of, there are, do you have? Do you have an ox? Do you have a mouse? A rat?
Yeah, and adding that word in Chinese there, nali, which I really should add to this list probably at this point. But now you can talk about the rat being there. Do you have a rat there? And stuff like that. So just really adding just little incremental bits. Now you have like 10 more things you can say with just one more word. Yeah, because you can compare back to the kids and to the picture. What about 3 questions you could ask?
in my head, I go to the rat is on the ox. So I want to add that word and say, is the rat on the ox? Is the ox on the rat kind of stuff? But that's not really using what we have. But that's the
But
thing.
maybe that's your next. Maybe that's your next one. Mhm. Yeah, to back up one step before talking about on, is it there? Is it there? Is it there? Is it there? Is it like, you know what I mean? You could say, you could still use reference to location without adding that next new word quite yet if you don't feel like you're ready for that, or it doesn't make sense to add that yet. Or you're seeing kids totally like deer in the headlights, like, oh, okay, I better stay with those familiar words a little bit longer before I add something else.
Or maybe the question like, is there one rat, two rat, just one cow, two cow?
Yep. Yeah, how many? If you wanted another, like the on would be maybe one more word. If you wanted to add one more, size might be a good one. You know, is the rat big? Is the ox big? Are you big? Is the ox big or are you big? Like, now that's a kind of a simple comparison question. In Chinese, you can say it that way and it gets that meaning across without adding too much more. Are you big or is the rat big? Some of those. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Well, for me, I would say swimming, but that's like another whole huge thing. Like, what is it?
This is where, yeah, where you start to get, is it, if it makes sense for your lesson goal, go for it. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe you want to talk about actions instead of, like, I'm thinking in terms of the Chinese story of the zodiac animals. And that's where I'm heading with this. So I want to be introducing words that are going to help me tell that story in a few lessons from now. Swimming could work for that. Absolutely. Maybe a student shouts out, swimming. Then you think, oh, they're interested. You can build on that right there in real time. I would go to another question. Now we see something else in this picture. Now there's also a cat. Is the cat happy? Is the rat happy? The cat's there. The cat's where there's water, you know, like now we start to get a little bit, you know, just a little bit more. Now we've got some more animals. We start getting in there. Oh, look, this cat is something, something. Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll maybe come back to that one in a moment. So picture talk and that same approach where you're getting a series of still images and you're going to do some descriptions, some questions. Students give you an answer, you're going to restate their answer and build it into a longer question. Some of them are personalized questions about the students and their feelings, their reactions, what they see, what they think, what they wonder. You can also do this with video clips. So I call this modified movie talk. The original movie talk is a lot more free form and it's mostly using full films, which is great with more advanced students. If you take a very short video clip though and screenshot it, now you have a series of images that you can do like picture talk, but it's telling a story. So I love that. I find that great. And I think that's a really nice way to tie in cultural things. I use a lot of videos that are made from a Chinese context, and then we can talk about them in comprehensible language. At the end, they can see the video, but they don't need to know the language from the video itself. We talked about what we saw in it. They still got the cultural exposure and understanding from that. So this is a really nice way to build into that. Following up on it is really great. So those pictures now are familiar. They've processed language. They've got some language things that might even come to mind when they see the picture again. And so adding captions on a second round through the same pictures, like I could go right back to the beginning one and ask students like, okay, I'm going to type what can we say about this? And maybe one sentence, maybe two, and then on to the next one. 1-2 sentences. What do we want to say about this picture? So after you've already kind of talked through it and developed that oral comprehension, now you can build in something that's going to take them into the next step, which is, for me, reading aloud as a class, doing something whole class with reading. Matching pictures to what they hear. One of the fun things with this is like putting 4 pictures on screen and saying something that describes one or more or none of the pictures. So like if you can imagine 4 of those pictures we just saw, all of them had at least one ox. So you could say something about there is one ox. And now they can pick from 4 different answers. You could have them write it on a whiteboard. I used to have them throw things at the screen because it was like a big projection screen. I love that. So, and they did too. So being able to throw something soft, of course, in class was really cool for them. We did it by teams. In fact, they had an animal that was their mascot, and the whole thing is very elaborate. But you could do that super simply, just hear and match to it. It becomes a more higher order thinking skill when it's not simply match the word to the picture or match the sentence to only one picture. But when you're asking something that's making them have to think about all the scenes, and it takes a little more processing. I like adding that level of it. So then it's not just a like fly swatter game for vocabulary practice. It's thinking about meaning in a deeper way. We talked a little bit about advantages and challenges there. Let's break just briefly, and then we'll be ready for next 1 or 2 of those. Okay. So I'll be here, but I'm going to sip tea, and I might go refill my tea a little bit. So C2, we have about 35 minutes. I have 2 more activity things to talk through. I don't want to do them in a rush, but I don't want to go too slow either. Do you prefer, do you think, to have both of those kind of just treated in a little bit more brief way? Or should, one of the things I could do is mostly skip listen and draw and go for the experiential learning one. I think it relates more to your own program goals. Listen and draw is great, but it's more similar to picture talk. I think it's something that you might be able to do based on your own experimenting. Experiential learning was trickier, I think. So I would lean that way if we only did one as a real emphasis. Sounds okay? Okay, we will do a little skip ahead, and then if we end up with time to go back to listen and draw stuff, we will. Okay. Okay, so experiential learning is, I think I've seen other people use this name, but I'm not sure who, to be honest. I think of it like it's taking TPR and going several more steps with it. Kind of like narrating actions. Like there's I think he was French, named Gouin, Gouin. Way back in the 1800s, he developed a language learning approach that was more or less having a sequence of actions to do. So it was very similar to TPR in the end. Walk to the door, touch the door, open the doorknob, pull the door, walk through the door, close the door. And that was like his whole approach to language, was getting these sequences. It's sort of like that. So it's, if you can do that TPR kind of thinking, this is just adding some complexity to it. So we are starting from a plan, an end goal. You want them to be able to do something, and then making a backwards plan from that to plan out the language that you need to use to be able to do that thing in the target language rather than explaining it in English. So I think this is the answer for programs that want to do a lot of cultural activities, but want to do it in the target language. So often we lose one of those two. We either focus in on language and we lose some of these experiential types of things, or we focus on the experience and we lose target language. We just make it a culture day in English. But we can combine them. It's just a little trickier. So these were things that I have done. Dancing, these are two kinds, like Minzu from where I lived in Yunnan province. I learned dances from the people there. Then there's the dance from the northeast of China. It's what that's referring to. I did tea tasting, which was fabulous fun one year. Very elaborate, and I think in COVID-19 you cannot, but maybe within the next year we're going to be able to do things like that again. Cooking lessons, I've done that actually online. I don't think I did. I have cooked in class as well. Handwriting and calligraphy are really, they lend themselves very well to experiential learning. You can make a language learning lesson out of Chinese calligraphy rather than simply just teaching them in English how to do it. What would be appealing? And I realize we have other language teachers here too. I'm aimed at Chinese because of my background and because I was invited to do something that was particularly focused on Chinese, but please don't feel left out. If you have another idea from a different cultural background, a different language community, please feel free to share it. Should we take a vote? We could do it that way too. Or is there one that we should aim for? Or we'll actually plan it backwards together. I don't have anything prepared. We're just going to talk through how we would do it.
I think that sort of food or cooking might be one that's interesting for me. I mean, there's some dances particular to German, but it's maybe not as much as a modern cultural element, I don't think. Then
I had an old Saturday Night Live skit come to mind for German dance, but that's a little different. So.
There is some German dance, and it's probably fun for the kids. It feels a little old-fashioned for me.
Yeah.
Compared to Latin dances or something like that, but.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or maybe it's not as distinctly, Mm-hmm. Sure. Is if we aim for something that is like cooking that leads to food tasting, would that work for others? Seeing some nods, mild nods. Okay, let's do that. So we want to think about like which thing are we going to make? Something that's maybe representative as a food would be dumplings from Chinese. It's also something that culturally people do together. Like you have a dumpling making party and you eat the meal at the end. So I've been in that kind of setting a lot. Even if you're invited to someone's home, they might prepare all the dishes, but they'll have the guests come and help them make the dumplings. So it kind of covers both bases. So that can be like a cooking lesson that leads to the students making it with you, that then leads to eating. I'm going to go with that. How's that? So let's think then, what kinds of actions do the students need to understand, do, and what sorts of nouns or verbs will drive us towards that direction? Like if we're making dumplings, particularly. I'm going to write on my whiteboard over here. Now I wish I had the slide the other way. Well, we can remember that we're doing dumpling making, right? That's our end goal.
I guess we would need maybe ingredients if we were going to start there. Like
could be. And this is where it can easily explode, right? A way to, at least in the case of that, that food, one of the things we can do is, if we want to keep it very simple, we could say the inside and the outside, right? So thinking of like ingredients gets to be really big. I would look for, in the case, depending on the language, are there cognate words for ingredients that are not going to be too burdensome for the learner? Great. You know, salt in Spanish is sal, right? Probably going to be okay. They're going to see this white thing, probably all right with that. Now, in Chinese, it's going to be very burdensome real fast if we do that. So for that, I would like, and these are actually the Chinese term, they don't use the word that means outside, but it's called the skin. And then the filling. Let's put the real words there. Only 2 words isn't too bad. And now when we've got those 2 words, we can think about what ways we would instruct them. In making steps of cooking, I would tell them about it. I would then mock doing it. I would actually do it. Maybe I would first fit in, have the students kind of coach me along. Okay, now wait, which one do I do next? Do I put the skin in my hand now? Or do I put the filling in my hand? No, the skin. Okay, the skin. I put the skin on my hand. Now I put another skin on my, no. You put the filling on your, so things like that. Like you can have them kind of react along with you. So like so first, like we model it various ways, then they help us to talk through it. So before I'm actually doing anything on heat, then we actually cook it, then review what we did. Maybe we have to eat first. Eat it, discuss what we ate. This needs to be a better slide. I can see that. A little bit there. So, but the reason I'm doing it this way is it's so flexible. Like these kinds of activities, you determine how you want to play it out. I'm thinking of all the possible ways we can use the same language or really close to the same language to talk about these things so that they get language and context, lots of exposure to that. And then we'll keep thinking about what other words we'll need to introduce to them. Sometimes there's other specialized terms like mix, stirring, different kinds of things. If you want to think in terms of which one of those matter enough for me to keep it. When I taught dance lessons, I didn't do more than, I think I had 8 words or phrases, actually, phrases for it. And one of them was this. Like this, like that. So do like this. Don't do like that. And so again, it's like if you're thinking simple beginner language, using phrases like this, like that, do this, do that, can be very helpful in any kind of experience-based stuff, but particularly I think cooking things.
And this experimental approach, would you do that towards the beginning when you're introducing a lesson, or it could just be interchangeable, like?
I would put it at the end. I would, what we're doing, we're still kind of thinking about which words are we going to need to use in the experiential learning lesson. And then probably planning out something that's going to let us introduce those words beforehand.
Maybe
and then we're putting put. That's great. Yeah. And put. Do this, do that. Don't do this, don't do that. Don't put that. Put a lot, put a little bit. That might be helpful in making dumplings too. Or maybe the phrase for too much would be helpful too, because you're trying to put the right amount of filling on the skin. And for like the folding up, like this, like that. Look, do it like this. There's the skin, like this. Not like, you know what I mean? What else? What else might we need? Depending on the filling, you want to think about allergies, food avoidances. Vegetarian dumplings might be a good idea to avoid meat things and other stuff. So there's so many different kinds of filling now. You could end up with one or two. So if you had a couple of them, saying words for meat and for veg might be helpful if you wanted to go that route. I think it depends on your school and what you have the flexibility with. If we're going to also include the eating part and talking with them about their experience, here's where it gets fun with kids. They sometimes are very frank about not liking things. Maybe you've had the same experience. So coaching them in a culturally appropriate way, how to deal with that. And I'm not Chinese, and I wonder sometimes if my students react to me because they know that I'm not a native Chinese speaker, so maybe they're freer with their opinion. But I see my native Chinese teacher friends, and they get students saying things that are really rude. So, I used to think maybe like I was they saw me as one of them, so they thought they could say whatever. But helping to coach them about what you can say that's like, very interesting. If they don't have to love it, so reactions to food.
Yeah, we always said, I'm not used to it. 不习惯. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not used to it. That's a good one. Let's see, liking, right? Interesting. Maybe like 2, 3. And then you've got a little bit and you've got too much or a lot. And so you can help them vary it. And I would do a little bit of direct English coaching on this, because one of the goals that I would have is that they can behave in a way that's not offensive. So if they're invited to a Chinese family's home for dumplings and they don't like the dumplings, they aren't going to be without words. Like they can do something that's from within the culture to express thanks. Like, ooh, actually, that's a really good one. 辛苦了 might be worth doing because of the cultural use of that. It's like, for the non-Chinese, it's like it's a really specialized phrase. It's kind of like saying somebody really worked hard for you and did this thing for you. It's not necessarily saying that this is my favorite new food, but it's a very honorific way to acknowledge that the person did something for you. So if somebody cooks for you and you're there at the table, you would say this phrase. It's really a good one to tell your teacher or somebody who did something. So that's a good bit. I'm thinking, 4 or 5 days of class where maybe we want to talk about this. We would maybe show pictures of people eating dumplings. Have you eaten dumplings? This is the filling of dumplings. Look, this is a meat filling. That's a meat filling too. That's a vegetable filling. There's not meat. That filling has meat. Oh, look, is there chocolate filling? Oh, no chocolate filling. I don't know. I'm thinking of words that are fairly simple, but can introduce those things. So we can show them pictures prior to this lesson with the experience. This is where that picture talk kind of makes a nice flow into some of the other activities we can do with language. Doing things with like this, like that, using TPR, put the filling here. Don't put the filling there. And acting that out and playing with that a bit. Put a little bit of something there. Put a little bit of something there, slowly, quickly. Just adding those 2 words can make things interesting again. Just a little bit more language. So if we're thinking about these kinds of things, like looking for what is going to lend itself to introducing those words, at least in a preliminary way, because I think this would be too much to do from the get-go with experiential learning as an approach. I would want to break it down a little bit if they have no prior language background. But, you know, within a 6 or 8 week experiment, 6 or 8 week exploratory class, if you're building towards this as your goal, I think it might be feasible if you want to go that route. So giving them reactions so that they start using those, like I would put them on signs, like the kinds of things that I've been holding up occasionally. So they've got things that they can say there, like making that list and letting them react to different things we do in class leading up to this lesson where we actually cook and eat.
In this case of using food, will you totally just not introduce any vocabulary of the food ingredient, but instead?
Yeah, probably. I would keep it as simple as possible, because I'm thinking of exploratory 4th and 5th graders. So if I were doing this with Chinese 3, where I had 100 hours of class time or 150 hours of class time across the whole year, yeah, there we could definitely start getting into the details. But if it's just a few hours of lessons with them, I would probably avoid it. Unless there's some other reason that you feel like that's important. It's totally legitimate to do. It just takes the time from other things that might be more impactful in communication. So like words like put or like this, you can use those in so many contexts. But the word ginger is probably only going to be in food ingredients. So you might have a reason to want to do it anyway. Totally okay. But thinking through that, like, I've got a budget of a very limited time. Another thing that you can do, let's say there's kind of a combination of some language you really want them to retain and be confident to be able to respond to acquire. Maybe in the moment of the actual cooking, you're not going to ask them to do everything, like not to know every word, not to understand every word totally perfectly as you mix the filling up yourself. Maybe you just want to say the words as you do it and just let them hear those and see them and kind of get the gist of them. That's okay too. You don't have to like spend the time for them to retain those words as well. And that is also a nice way to meet the needs of heritage learners, where they can understand those words, or at least they're familiar to some degree with what those different things are. They can hear those words and be affirmed like, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But the second language learners, I think it's probably going to be too much in a recipe like dumplings, where you could have 12 different things that get put in the filling. So yeah, so maybe this kind of thing, picture talk for a day, maybe 2, looking at different kinds of dumplings, Chinese ones, Italian ones, pierogies. Like dumplings are a really cross-cultural item. Lots, and I'm sure I'm missing a lot of different kinds of things. Empanadas, right? Kind of, am I right about that? Sort of are a dumpling. I'm looking for Spanish speakers giving me feedback. I'm not as sure. So you can compare other dumplings to that. You're going to aim for the ones that you have planned out, but you can show and discuss those through picture talk. Actions here with putting something there, putting something, not putting something there, putting it a little bit there, putting a lot over here. And then the reactions. So I don't know, are we missing any language they might need?
How many vocabulary would you think in this picture talk would you think that it's the minimum and maximum of it?
Yeah, that's a tricky thing to ask, actually. If we're talking about words, vocabulary, phrases that I want them to really be confidently able to understand to the point of beginning to produce, I would say maybe 4 or 5 per hour of class. They're going to hear some other things beyond that, but in terms of their retention, maybe I'm thinking 4 or 5 that are going to theme the whole lesson. So those could be in this case, filling skin like this a little bit, or something like that. But your own students are going to tell you that. And I'm going to want to reuse those next lessons as well, even if I'm adding 2, 3 more. So I'm still revisiting and reusing those older ones rather than the train car where, okay, that lesson I did this, I don't need to do that again until we get to the end. Probably not. Probably you want to keep using those and building like the cloud.
I wanted to add in just a thought. While you were talking, I thought of this, like, I think in the past I've added in like brain breaks leading up to a cooking lesson. So like we're gonna mix, like a brain break would be like, we're mixing this and we're adding that and we're, blending if you're using a blender, or whatever you're,
Yeah,
you're
cool.
gonna use. And then,
And
on the day of the lesson, I can add in more of like the ingredient pieces, or maybe I add in ingredient pieces to other things we're doing, like a picture talk early in the week. Then on the day of, like, you have a little more flexibility to like, build in more of things that come up, questions they have or words that you want to incorporate. So
yeah, that sounds great. That sounds super great. So I like that a lot. So now you've got TPR is really good for classroom procedures too, like stand up, sit down, put the book away, and what you were just saying, like mix faster, mix slower, sit down and mix, stand up and blend, or whatever. Yeah, totally. Those are great ways to. It's super fun. It's letting them move, and it's also preparing for some of the language you can build on. Oh, and then approach here is like on a poster and introducing a couple of those per lesson. So you've got, they can use words about liking, oh, I like it. I like it a lot. I like it a little bit. Some things like that. Oh, we didn't talk about eat too. So eating might be part of picture talk. They're eating dumplings. They're eating dumplings with meat filling. They're eating dumplings with skin. This person's eating the skin, but not the filling. It's all that kind of stuff. And then asking about what they eat. What kind of dumplings do you eat? And then coaching them again afterwards after they eat it, and then reviewing the whole process. So now, okay, then we're ready to type, perhaps, where we're going to start to write and get some reading material ready for the next lesson. They can talk us through, or the next, if we're actually cooking dumplings and they're eating dumplings and we're discussing them, that's a whole hour for sure. But after that, we can talk through those same steps. Like first, we watch the teacher mix. We watched the teacher do this. We watched the teacher make filling. That might be the simplest way in Chinese, just saying make filling. We put the skin here. We put the filling here. We did this. The teacher cooked, or then we ate. 6 people weren't used to it. 12 people loved it. The teacher worked hard. Something like that. And typing some of those things. Theoretically, in the way that I think about this stuff, these words, those words, maybe some of these would also have previously been encountered, previous cycles through that listening that leads to reading. So this, I'm imagining like 3rd week, 4th week, 5th week, ready for this kind of a thing. Having had a week that does some of this with some reading, a week that does some of these things, and then does some reading based on that. And so then now we're kind of putting it together towards that end goal, maybe with just a little bit of additional new words in the reading. reading we'll talk about next week. So, and design of reading, particularly with Chinese in mind, I think is a little trickier than with a language that's very obviously phonetically written.
Do you ever, would you ever add in like the cleaning, like if you want them to clean up, you know, like
Great,
I
yeah.
I think something I've done too is like kind of in the same vein of like, if you know you want them to clean up, right? Like and help with that process, like adding that in earlier too. So yeah, just or like
Perfect. I always forget that, yeah, cleaning up. We should definitely teach them about cleanup. Yeah, something. And in the Chinese, again, we could do put this there. You know, take this and put it there. Yeah, just depending on your vocab needs or what is going to be giving you the most reuse is what I'm looking for. Again,
Wash.
thinking of beginners.
Wash, maybe like wash your hands. We're gonna,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah, especially now. Yeah, wash your hands. Mhm. Yeah. And for this thing, totally legitimate to script it. Totally, probably a good idea because there's a lot of moving parts in doing a lesson like this. Even if what you're doing is kind of just talking through the steps first, then talking through it with them, helping us. So you're kind of asking questions as you go, like, no, should I do this next? Should I do that next? Then you actually cook it and you're narrating while you cook. There's a lot of things to keep track of in your mind. Having all written down is totally legitimate. Asking them about what they ate. Serving them could be a thing too. Do you want one? Do you want two? Do you want this filling, that filling? A little bit? Oh, too much, too much. Yeah, like you probably have to limit some number because you can't make a full meal out of it, but enough to taste. So serving issues could be cleanup issues. Is this concrete enough? Like what are some details that you aren't sure about?
I would like to, I'm actually curious, and I know you didn't have time to do the dance lesson, but it would be pretty fun to do it like in person, cultural dance.
Yeah.
What kind of vocab are you using before? I know you said like this, like that.
Mhm.
What else when you're using simple?
Yeah, I taught them the fan dance from the northeast of China. So I spent a summer in Changchun, China, and I attended dance lessons every evening that I was free that out on the street. So I learned it from the aunties and uncles that went out there after they're retired, and they did. So I bought the fans. So you do special things with the fans. So they knew fan, they knew handkerchief. So I did have some specialized vocabulary they're not going to probably use beyond that, but it seemed worth it to me. I used like this, like that, not like this, not like that. Left foot, left hand, right hand. So things like left hand fan goes like this. Right hand handkerchief goes like this. Actually, I'm using my left hand for that. I said the wrong ones, but yeah. And then we practiced the different actions. We would model it. I modeled it and then ask them to, tell me, am I doing it the right way? Had a student come up, the student modeled it. Everybody did it in the class all together. And then we did it walking in a line without the fans and the handkerchief, then with them. Then we listened to the music and we watched the actual video of people doing it. Oh, who's doing it? There's men and doing it. There are women. Look, there's kids. Hey, look, it's me. I had a video that I was in, so I could show them that too. And then we actually did it. And then they wanted to get to do like their own free form dance because they thought these fans were so cool. And so at the end is when I said, okay, we're going to spend the last 5 minutes and you can dance how you want. So that was kind of the end reward because we are going to learn the real dance first, kids. And, so I wanted to do that, but I also wanted them to feel free to play around a bit. It was really cool. I thought it was fun. I've done stuff with the ethnic dance from the region of Yunnan province, where I was from too, but not as full blown into a whole unit. And I think in that case, this is a little bit more language wise than I did with them. And I think I might have used 6 to 8 lessons with them. And I had 35 minutes with them. So 6 to 8 lessons, building slowly up to doing the dance. And we went out into the courtyard of the school and we did it out there so people could see us and hear our music and that kind of thing. Yeah. I see only a couple minutes left. So I want to get to go to my next slide. And then we're looking for March 27th next time. So I'm suggesting 2 things that you might want to focus in on in terms of incorporating some of these things into practice. What techniques we've talked about for oral comprehension, adding to what you already do, checking for students' comprehension, what might you increase, what might you adjust, and then looking at what strategy for auditory input we want to try first with students, how we get ready. A couple of tips about that. If you possibly can, meet with somebody who is sympathetic to you being a teacher. They don't have to be a teacher themselves, but they have to be either a willing language student to meet with you over Zoom if necessary. Either like you can partner up with a teacher, you know, or just somebody that's like a good friend who's willing to go along with you and give you feedback. And so then that helps you think about like, okay, so if I have these 10 pictures, how can I use language that somebody else is going to understand? Where am I finding the places I get stuck? How will I solve that? So doing some kind of practice run with an adult who's not going to be a classroom management issue and is sympathetic to you is really great. Which materials might you need it? And then like planning out when will you do this? Thoughts or questions?
This has been so helpful. Thank you.
Oh, good. Good. Yeah, I feel like that experiential learning thing is like plan your unit. Picture talk is like drop in anytime you want. And so, but they can coordinate.
Yeah, this is really useful because I think I'm used to doing the other way around, where just introducing a bunch of vocabulary that they probably will not retain, and then using English for instruction, which they're not learning that for that part.
Yeah. Cool. Any last questions before we sign off? Or any thoughts if you want to share, like, yeah, I know I want to definitely do this, that.
One question I have, and I don't know, maybe I asked this last time, but in German, you know, when we're talking about have, there's not just have, it changes for you have, you know, like kind of similar, somewhat similar in English, but you have, I have, we have. Do I need to think of those as they're all still, I'm teaching one word, or am I thinking about each one of those as a different word and I need to slow it down, or what's the best way to teach that when grammar is an issue?
Right, that's a great question. And my sense from French, because I have learned French and learned a little Spanish, so it may be slightly different. If the words are needed, you use them and you make sure that they understand them. You may need to lower your expectation in terms of student production that's accurate, because there's more going on. So there's like 6 or 8 different possible ways to say that verb. If they goal first would be that they understand them in context when they need it, when it's natural to use it. And then over time, expect the students' production to start to incorporate that. Expect that probably along the way, there's going to be some messiness. They might use the one that they've heard most often. They might use, I think I've read before, it's like third person gets used. The form of the verb from third person is the first. Okay, Kristen's giving me a thumbs up. So as long as you're understanding it and you're continuing to model and continuing to expose them to language that is natural and accurate, it's going to come out in the end. So you don't need to overly worry about it as long as they comprehend the meaning.
Thank you.
Mhm. Cool. Well, it's been delightful meeting with you again, and I'll send this PowerPoint, which also has that listen and draw, which we did not talk through. But that one, there's some more resources online for listen and draw stuff too, I think. So if you're interested in that, there's absolutely go for it. And I'll see you in about a month. So cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah. See you next time.